All right, welcome back to Med Ed Animation. Today I'm going to share with you an animation I worked on and just kind of go over the overall workflow of how I created this final 2D vector animation, starting with these simple sketchbook sketches. So I have other videos on my channel where I talk about specific techniques for beginners. In this one, it'll just be sort of an overview from 10,000 feet what my workflow looks like. So I'm going to talk about Inkscape and Synfig. So first we're in the program called Inkscape, which is free. And I'm just, I've imported the image and I'm starting to go over the shapes in outline with the Bezier curve spline tool. And as you notice, I'm not using the pencil draw tool. And that's because, especially when you're animating, but in vector graphics in general, I've learned that it's nice to use as few points as possible. So while you could just use a pencil and trace over everything, you'll end up with all these extra points in places you don't need. So I like the simplest curves to represent the shapes I can possibly find. And to explain what I'm drawing, so basically this is supposed to be sort of this coral thing that comes up and then turns into a mushroom cloud and then turns into an actual mushroom. It's for a music video I'm working on about coral reefs. So now I'm just outlining the mushroom cloud. Of note, these smoke rings around this fire here, you're going to see later, I'm already planning out how I'm going to make it look like the fire is going through the smoke ring for Synfig later. So we'll see that a bit later. And this video will kind of modulate speeds faster and slower for what's important or not. On the top right, you can see I have some layers. I put the sketch in a separate layer and locked it. That way I won't accidentally click on it and mess with the sketch. Right now I forgot to put the other things in separate layers, so I'll do that in a bit. So now I'm working on the mushroom here, you know, planning ahead of like how I'm going to be able to move this mushroom as it grows and sort of like a time-lapse kind of look. You notice I didn't worry about getting those lines, the gills of the mushroom, exact to that circle around them because I'm going to use blend modes like onto and things like that in Synfig later to make it look like it is inside that hole. So I'm not sweating it right now. And you can see for the roots, it was defaulting to a weird fill pattern, but I just left it for now because I can fix things in bulk in Inkscape rather than trying to fix every single time. And it was defaulting weird and I couldn't fix it. So now I'm starting the coloring process. And so by the way, the first part you just saw the outlining I did with a drawing tablet where I was tracing, but everything else now I'm going to do with a mouse the rest of the video. And so this whole process is pretty mouse friendly. So I'm just selecting the different objects, adding a fill in the object properties fill and stroke section you're seeing on the top right. Mostly focusing on the fill colors right now. At some point, there's some outlines. And generally, you know, using the eyedropper tool and things to create some consistency of hues across the related objects. Because, you know, it's kind of mimicked after old traditional animation where they had a certain palette of paints for a given character or item. So now what I'm doing is I'm adding shadows. I love using vector graphic like shadows like this to add detail. So my initial shapes are simple, but then look at that, how just like these very faint shadows tell the eye that there's more contour. And as an educator, I like this concept because it gets back to sort of this like big picture cognitive load sort of thing. It's like, how can you use the least data possible to convey information to your learners so that they process it and the brain receives it the way you want them to. So here I'm using a technique I talk about in another video where basically I intentionally make the shadow shape a little too big, and then by duplicating the base layer and then combining the two with Command-Shift-8 or Command-Star, it creates like an overlay. I forget if it's called Combine, I believe, where it shrinks the shape, the shadow shape, just to where those shapes overlap. So that's a super handy shortcut to be comfortable with. And by the way, as I go through this, if there are certain steps that I'm breezing through and you want to know more about, feel free, you know, check out the other videos, but also feel free to ask me in the comments and I'll try to keep an eye out and I can explain things verbally or make subsequent videos for specific things of interest. So now I'm working on this mushroom cloud here. I added these like fire streaky shapes just with my mouse, you know, not even using a stylus or anything at this point. So from an artistic standpoint, so for the mushroom cloud, I'm picturing, okay, the light source is the fire of the blast, so therefore the shadow will be above, right? Because it's being lit from below. So that's why this cloud has a shadow on top of it. But the bottom cloud, in a moment, will have a shadow on the bottom. The like lumpy clouds look a little bit like a painting on a pediatrics doctor's office or something. But later in Synfig, I'll kind of jitter them a little bit more and make them a little more unique. Adding some extra shadows again, just to add subtle detail, just little shadows. Here I'm adding that little bit of glow on top and on the edges of the cloud. And again, using that Command-Shift-8 function. So duplicate the object, then Command-Shift-8 with the shadow and the duplication selected. All right, so now I'm fixing these roots. So basically I got rid of the fill and just left it with an outline color. And now I'm just gonna color some things in. There are a couple ways to manage these lines, these gills. I ended up deciding to just leave them and then do some formatting later in Synfig. So you'll see that in a bit. I'm making these little liver spot kind of things, different transparencies, so that it's just a little more natural and varied. Then I changed the color of the roots a bit. Okay, and then we flip to Synfig. So I went fast, sorry, but it's Command-Shift, a save as in Inkscape. You can save as a .sif or Synfig file, and then just open it right up in Synfig, which is another free open source program for Mac and PC and Linux. So now I'm doing a lot of the prep work, and this prep work is super important, right? So I have these folders that were my layers in Inkscape, become my groups in Synfig, and you can see I am lining up all the origins of the groups at the actual bases of the objects using that gray handle. And then I put them all on top of each other. So when I'm thinking of importing multiple objects and having one transform into the other, I try to kind of pre-line them up like this. Yeah, now I'm just going into my canvas settings. I'm keeping it at a 16:9 ratio. I like my frame rate at 12 rather than 24 because I feel like it's a little more forgiving, rather than doing this very choppy, very smooth but fake looking animation with the auto in-betweening. I go to 12 and that way it all looks a little bit choppy, a little bit closer to that traditional animation look, not too smooth. This is just annoying. Ugh, I think I was having trouble with the transformation tool. Things being selected all, just trying to fix this little awkward point I had. Oh, so a pet peeve of mine, you might have seen me, I think I just did it. I went around and like right-clicked a bunch of points and merged tangents. This is because when you import these shapes from Inkscape, to my knowledge, there's no way to have the tangents be merged. So then when you start manipulating and animating, you get all these weird, annoying, like twisted vertices and stuff because you have to manually merge the tangents one by one. So I put in a request on GitHub with the Synfig people. Hopefully they're going to eventually create some sort of way to do that en masse. Anyway, so basically I've created like 2 big waypoints so far, and I've been just kind of distorting this coral so that my original shape actually became the second, keyframe, not waypoint. My original drawing ended up being the second keyframe, not the original, and the original became this like shrunken one so that it looks like it grows. Now what I'm doing is work on the outline. So actually Synfig I like better than Inkscape for the ability to adjust outline thickness at each point like this. And so I like to just, gives it a much more naturally drawn look to take the time to do this, to like make some points small or invisible, some points of the line thickness very thick, so it looks naturally drawn. But little Socratic method here. So can you guys find what terrible mistake of Synfig I'm making right now? What is activated that shouldn't be activated? The animate mode, right? So when I was doing this, I didn't realize animate mode was on. This is one of the most common mistakes in Synfig, is like leaving it on when you want to, when you don't mean to, or off when you don't mean to. So suddenly when I go to animate it, I go, oh shoot, at the second keyframe, the line thicknesses are back to how they were because I animated it by accident. So instead of, there's no good way en masse to like copy a waypoint for all line thicknesses of all vertices. So instead, so I just said, okay, I'm gonna go to the second time point. I'm gonna, there's that like lock button that I unlocked so that it won't animate to the next keyframe. And I'm just going through and trying to mimic again. So it's a little extra labor, but actually created a cool look because now you have this dynamically changing line thickness between keyframes. So anyway, that was my way of fixing a mistake with line thickness with animate mode on. What else am I doing here? So now I'm working on the mushroom cloud, kind of a similar thing. Oh, cool. So here I'm gonna do something really cool, right? So I'm gonna use sets. So Synfig has an ability where if you want to, let's say you want to grab easily a bunch of layers that are related to each other, but actually not consecutive in the stack. Like I have some of this cloud that's behind the fire and some in front. You can select those using like Shift key and Command key and everything. And then you can add them to a set and name the set. So I name that set bottom clouds. And so you can see now whenever I want, rather than manually clicking all those layers, I can now just click bottom clouds, or I double click it rather, and I can access all of those non-consecutive layers. And so I'm doing the same now with the top clouds. So yeah, this mushroom cloud was pretty fun. Yeah, because I was able to manipulate group things at multiple depths. So that was fun. And keep in mind, I should have said when I was inkscaping before, like a common mistake I've seen is, people who haven't animated and they're just making the vector drawing, they'll just like have the background layer line up with where it meets another object, but you really want to make more of the object than is visible, so that way when you animate, you have wiggle room, right? So really like draw more than you think you need. Yeah, and so what I did here, in addition to messing with line thickness, I decided to feather some of the outline layers of these cloudy things because I thought the white solid line was just a little too cheesy. I feel like legit animation on TV, they don't feather lines, and yet I think they're just, good artists, so they don't have to like use this. It's kind of like when I do music stuff, I put too much reverb, and I feel like that covers up mistakes. I feel like feathering is just the reverb of the visual system. Oh, cool. So I took the loop of that cloud and I used the alpha over mode. So the layer that was the hole inside it was alpha over as the blend mode. Blend method, and that lets it like cut out. And so then I clicked and dragged down, and now I have this animatable layer that I think I'll use again later. I think you'll see it to make that thing where the fire goes into the cloud and cuts out just the stuff behind it. And of course, the feathering does make that a little more forgiving as well. Okay, so now we're in this mushroom. Now I'm going to fix these gills. So first of all, I'm going to do some line thickness stuff. I'm changing like the and by the way, yeah, I like this technique. You can select multiple layers at once, and then basically on the top, actually it's Alt 4 or 5, I believe, to make the purple line thickness thing show up. And I hide the other one, so then I could quickly just click and drag and select multiple lines with multiple line thicknesses at once and just be adjusting in kind of an efficient way. I'm just adjusting the color of this outline, trying to come up with what's not too in your face. Again, going for that variable line thickness look whenever possible. So here was fun. I was today years old when I learned that you can change the end of a root. I was just like, oh, what's this? And I found that there's a thing to make rounded ends, which looks so good for these like mycelial mushroom roots. So this is literally the first time I've done this in my life, but it worked out really well for this. So I decided to go over this look where you have these rounded ends, and I made the thickness of just the final vertex a little bit enlarged on each one. So you have that kind of like hyphae kind of like biological sort of thing where just the tip bulges a little bit. Anyway, so now you can see it's starting to come alive a little bit. And this is just a close-up to remind, this is how I've been, keeping organized, labeling my keyframes as I've gone. And I am sort of moving in chronological order, like moving forward. But I'm not totally just animating forward. I'm laying down major groundwork, and then I'm going to go back and add detail between the keyframes. So I'm not like a total, bozo about it. All right. So now what I'm doing is I'm going to start figuring out how to distort this mushroom to make it look like it's growing over time. And so I think I speed it up as it goes because you get the point. But this was a lot of fun. And I like almost overdid it, but I think it came out okay. By the way, this transform tool, it initially, the default hotkey for it is something that doesn't work on my Mac because it's some other function also. So there's actually a way, I won't go into this video, but there's a way you can actually edit hotkeys for Synfig. And so I changed it to my, I think, Alt-Z. And so now I have the super fast hotkey to toggle back and forth between the normal select arrow tool and that crosshair one next to it. That's good for these like little distortion-y kind of movements. It's a really powerful tool that it took me a while to figure out like why people were using it instead of the normal select arrow tool. But so you can see me using it here just to these more lifelike distortions whenever you have something biological. By the way, a lot of these shadows, like this shadow here, I've changed to the onto blend mode so that even if it goes out of the lines, you don't see random gray shadow layer floating in space. It only goes in its group on top of the mushroom stem. So I'm just figuring out, and I'm trying to, here my mind was starting to go to more like animation principles, like squash and stretch, and like how can I do this more like exaggerated motion, but, and generally, and I didn't do a great job of it here, but I'm always trying to like do far apart waypoints first, because once you start to be like, oh, this frame, this frame, this frame, at least for me, I tend to like overdo it, and then the auto-tweening is crazy and it looks unrealistic. So trying to get mostly fluid movements. And yeah, here's me just kind of like tweaking stuff. And I think here I'm thinking, okay, by the very end, I want it to more line up with that vertical positioning, more like the mushroom cloud and all that. All right, what's it doing now? By the way, along the way here, you're seeing me select large swaths of layers at the same time. So the way I do that is I select a group, and then on the bottom right, there's a button that's like select all child layers. And then you just hit that. Then you can hit Control A, select all points, and then you can use the transform tool to like just store everything you have selected at once. So it's a good way for bulk editing. That'll definitely make your CPU whine a bit. Oh yeah, here I was decided to add an additional shadow. A nice blend mode for some shadows is multiply. You can get another hue, like another color in there, but then multiply and it creates that nice shadow with like, and so I set the opacity like 0.2, 0.3, something like that. In fact, I think I even told the opacity here, I animate it, yep, so that when the mushroom's tilted and more light might be getting under it, it's a little bit of a lesser opacity and then it darkens. Okay, so here I'm just trying to get more artsy. So this, oh wait, actually, nope, type about something else. Oh, yep, it is. Okay. So color filter here. I never done this before, but I decided, okay, I'm going to create a rectangle region over my whole coral thing. And I'm going to set the blend mode to saturation, which means however saturated the color of the rectangle is how saturated all the stuff underneath it will be. And my idea here, so the music video is talking about coral reefs and saving coral and about coral bleaching, which is this process where coral turns white and loses its symbiotic algae. And so I figured, okay, I'm going to have this flickering sort of desaturation effect. And by the way, because I want it to more flicker, you see me starting to change some of these waypoints to the constant waypoint type instead of the clamped orange diamond. So it's switching to that kind of red, like Tetris shape. And that creates that more like just hard on-off change of an effect rather than like a gradual, like the clamped. So here you can see I'm going back in time to even earlier in that mushroom cloud's formation, so that as the opacity of the mushroom cloud, as it appears, so I started at an opacity of 0, and as it grows to full opacity, that cloud is already growing. And here I'm going to do something cool. So I want the cloud to expand over the mushroom, but I actually want the smoke by the end to go in front of the mushroom. So here I'm going to actually animate the Z depth. So on the bottom left here in the object properties, you can see that things have a Z depth. Yeah, there I go. And negative is closer to you, positive is further away. And as long as they're the same tier of layer, like one's not inside a folder or anything, you can like animate these Z depths and have the smoke, therefore, like where that red constant waypoint was, it suddenly jumps from the smoke being behind the mushroom to in front of the mushroom. As it's also, I think at some point I blur it and it's fading with the opacity. So you can create this, that's the best way in Synfig to like have things change their relative distance. I think I did a tutorial on Z depth. It's like a brain with a ghost and a moon circling around it if you want to find that. So yeah, cool. What else? Yeah, I use the blur effect. So you just go to new layer, blurs, and then I just pick the blur, not the motion blur, one of those others. But those are cool too. So I think I'm just still figuring stuff out. And, you know, a lot of it you saw me animate the actual individual vertices, selecting all and selecting groups of it. But sometimes you just grab the whole group, the whole folder, and just use the handles like the scale and the rotate and skew, like, you know, as well. Oh, here I did that thing. If you forget to have animate mode on, it asks you if you wanted to do it. But if you have a lot of points selected, you have to click it 1,000 times. Okay. So what am I doing here? Checking stuff out. Okay, here. So I decided to finish it off. At first I was going to do like a transparency and paint a background, but I decided, okay, I'm just going to do this cool like color flashing thing. So again, you can see I have the constant waypoint type on. So that way, when the color of this rectangle changes, it's an acute change. It's not gradually changing color. It's boom, 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 right? And so I'm just thinking like, and there are probably like artistic people out there who have much more, I'm like, color is like really an Achilles heel for me. But I went with some more kind of like faded natural hues when the mushroom shows up, and a lot of like hot colors when the mushroom cloud is happening. And then just some random like, and then I decided to just go like some random funny, like fully saturated rainbow colors for the mushroom cloud and stuff. So a little bit of like just a touch of that kind of like psychedelic kind of feel. Why did I zoom in here for you guys? Oh yeah, so now I'm just rendering. So I set the resolution to 4K, so 3480 times 2160, and then we're rendering. And so here's the final thing. So this is an excerpt from the song. It might not be where I put it, but yeah, I think it's gonna loop one more time. But anyway, yeah, so I hope you enjoyed watching this video and just got a sense of my general thought process as I'm going through this whole thing. I'm sure there are plenty of other tidbits or questions I could field about this video, so please throw them in the chat. I mean, throw them in the chat. So much zooming. Throw them in the comments, and I will get back to you. Enjoy.